Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask an interesting question, and he's like, hey, if I'm eating at caloric maintenance already, and I'm eating a given diet of a mixture of carbs, fat, protein, whatever, we don't need to know what he's eating, and I add 500 calories of protein, just straight protein to my currently existing diet, which is at maintenance, will I gain body fat? Shouldn't this stop me from gaining body fat? Because, you said protein doesn't really get stored as body fat. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, this is an interesting question, and here's the reason people get into this mindset, because they're not looking at something like this correctly, and they're under some assumption that by just adding protein to an existing diet, that it magically isn't going to cause any body fat gain. I mean, because, protein doesn't get stored as fat, and they're consuming maintenance already. But what they need to understand is that by adding the protein to their existing diet, it doesn't matter. Like it's not some magical thing in your body where your body knows, hey, for the last 37 days, you ate exactly 243 grams of carbs or whatever. It doesn't know all this. I mean, it basically knows the energy intake that's going on, but it doesn't remember this. You're not adding this to an existing diet as far as your body is concerned. This is now what you're eating. Meaning if you were eating 2,500 calories of whatever mixture and you throw another 500 calories of protein in, you're now eating a 3,000 calorie diet, right? That's your energy intake. And yeah, of course you're going to gain fat. Why wouldn't you gain fat? Now the person said, no, what do you mean? Because I did get in a further conversation, and I tell him, well, look, when your body you consume things, anything you start to consume more of, your body burns more of. That's just what it does. The human body will burn extra protein as fuel. If you just add extra protein to your diet that your body doesn't need, it isn't utilizing specifically for gaining muscle or structural repair or making enzymes or something else, it's gonna use it for fuel. And the person's like, well, I'm confused, because most experts say the human body doesn't really burn much protein for fuel. Yeah, under normal conditions. But what are normal conditions? The RDA, 50, 60, 70 grams of protein? Yeah, if you only eat 50 or 60 grams of protein a day, of course your body's not going to burn protein for fuel. It needs that protein. It needs that protein for various structural purposes in the body as a building block. It has to have it. Like 50 grams for most people is kind of your bare minimum. Anything under that is potentially problematic for a healthy adult male. If you're exercising and lifting weights, you're going to need more than that. But when you start consuming chronically more protein than your body uses or needs for anything, it's going to use it for fuel. That's the amazing thing about the human body. It burns everything for fuel. If you feed it a bunch of protein, it'll burn protein for fuel. If you feed it a bunch of carbs, it'll burn carbs for fuel. If you feed it fat, it'll burn fat for fuel. If you feed it a bunch of alcohol, it'll burn that for fuel. But it has a priority system there. And yes, the human body can burn protein as a fuel source through two different pathways. Now the idea there, well, you're adding protein calories, and that's metabolically expensive because your body has to break it down into glucose. Well, yeah, that's one aspect of it. About half of the excess protein you eat does get converted into glucose by the liver. And that actually costs a few calories to do that. But it's still going to have energy from it. But your body can also oxidize protein for fuel if it's given enough surplus protein. Now, you need to think about, you're talking about adding 500 calories of protein to your diet. 500 calories of protein, that's around 124 grams. After we take into account thermic effect and everything, I'm assuming that's what you're doing already. That 500 calories is that 4 calories per gram, which is after the thermic effect. Protein actually has more calories than that, but we don't track it that way. So about 125 grams. Well, if you were already eating 100, how about 150 grams of protein? All right, because you're at maintenance and you've been trying to gain muscle or maintain muscle. But let's drop it down low, 100 grams. All right, and you add another 125 grams of protein. That's 225 grams of protein. There's not a human being on earth who needs that much protein to gain muscle mass or for their basic metabolic functions and tissue repair and everything. There's no cause to go anywhere near that much for those goals. Some people just like a higher protein diet. They enjoy high protein foods. They find protein filling, so they stay leaner because they don't eat as much. Okay, those are reasons. But from a metabolism reason, you don't need that much. That's an excessive amount of protein. So what's your body going to do with it? It's going to burn it for fuel. And in fact, that is still an easier fuel source to utilize for a lot of functions in the body than fat is. So if you add 500 calories of protein a day to your diet, you are going to burn more protein for fuel. Well, if you're burning more protein for fuel, you're burning less fat for fuel. If you're burning less fat for fuel, out of the fat that you already ate, because now you're in a 500 calorie surplus, you're going to store more body fat. You're going to store more of the fat that you ate. And I covered all this in a video yesterday, and that's where that question came from. And people need to understand that most of the fat that's on your body comes from dietary fat that you eat. But that's because your body stores fat that you eat when you're in a caloric surplus, because it burns the carbs first, it burns the protein, it burns the other stuff, it burns alcohol first as a fuel source. Those are more readily available fuel sources for the short term. Fat is a long-term fuel source. It's a fuel source your body's going to tend to use more of when it's starving. It's going to tap into your fat stores. So it's going to tend to store the fat you eat. Now, and I need to remind people there, that doesn't mean that if you eat a really, really, really low-fat diet, you're not going to gain any fat. You can still gain fat on a really low-fat diet if your caloric surplus is there. Now, a really low-fat diet, you will gain less fat per calorie than you overeat. Meaning, let's go back and look at this realistically. If you added 500 calories of protein to your diet, will you gain as much fat as if you added 500 calories of fat to your diet if you were already at maintenance? No, you'll gain less for a couple of different reasons. Number one, using protein as a fuel source is actually somewhat metabolically expensive. You're going to chop some of those calories off. Number two, you're less likely to be overeating large amounts of fat in your diet if that's the case. And I could be wrong. A person's diet could vary. There are some people who, if they're already eating a fairly high-fat diet, if you're eating over 500 calories of fat every day, the difference is going to be pretty small, meaning adding 500 calories of protein versus adding 500 calories of fat, they're going to see pretty similar levels of body fat gain, with the protein being lower. The protein added being a little lower. But if you were eating a fairly low-fat diet and you added that, you're going to gain less fat. Because again, if there isn't 500 calories of fat available to store, the extra caloric surplus isn't really going to do that, because you don't really store very much carbohydrates as fat. And your body almost never stores dietary protein as fat. It either uses it for various metabolic functions in the body, for tissue repair, it oxidizes it for fuel, or it converts it to glucose. Well, excess glucose only stores as body fat at a very, very small rate. So again, statistically speaking, it's going to be very, very rare for any of the protein calories that you consume to ever get stored as fat. But they will very likely, the excess protein, get used as energy of some type. And if it's being used as energy of some type, that frees up energy that your body doesn't need from the fat that you eat. And if you've got surplus fat, then you're going to store it. And like I said before, you really can't realistically get away with less than about 30 grams of fat a day and maintain your health. You start falling under about 30 grams or so, you're really, really pushing it in terms of health risk. And some people might need a little more than that. Well, if you're consuming 30 grams of fat every day and you're overeating, that's still, when you do the math on that, let's say 20 grams or so a day of the fat that you eat could end up being stored as body fat out of the 30. 20 grams times 30 days is 0.6 kilograms. That is over a pound. That is over 1 pound. So even on a really, really low-fat diet, if you were overeating enough, you could absolutely gain a pound of fat every single month. That does start to add up. That might not sound like much, but just over a pound a month, do that for a year. That'll totally change your body composition in a bad way. But that's the problem. People get these ideas because of this promotion of high protein diets, that somehow if you're adding more protein to your diet, that all you have going on is just adding something that you can't store as fat, so therefore you don't store fat. But they're not factoring in that once you start adding something, it starts to reshift what your body is metabolizing. All right, if you add 500 calories of anything to your diet, your existing diet, I don't care what macronutrient it is, your body is going to shift to burning a little more of that as fuel, which means the other stuff you're eating it could be less prone to burning it as fuel. And the less prone it is to burning something for fuel, the more likely it is to store it. So you can't just come in and add protein to a pre-existing diet that's at maintenance, like in enough to gain weight, 500 calories a day, and not expect to gain some body fat from it. It doesn't work that way. Any caloric surplus will cause your body to store a little bit of body fat. The only exceptions are going to be people on certain combinations of anabolic drugs, and depending upon the composition of their diet, and novice lifters who can gain muscle really, really quickly when you're in your noob gains phase and you're eating a very, very small caloric surplus, meaning sometimes if you're eating enough to gain weight very slowly, like no more than a pound and a half a month, you can get away with that as a noob lifter without gaining any body fat. And in some cases, you might even recomposition a little bit. You might actually lose a very small amount of body fat. But barring those two situations, it is very, very unlikely that you can eat in a caloric surplus enough to be gaining weight without gaining body fat. And adding something to your diet doesn't just purely add something to your diet. It doesn't just mean, oh, I just added that and there's no other repercussions. So if that can't be stored, then I'm okay. That's not how it works. It shifts around your entire metabolism and what your body's metabolizing and using when you do that, because the human body is actually really an amazing machine. It is an absolutely amazing machine. And it's really beautiful and elegant in certain ways. I mean, the human body has its flaws, but in terms of its metabolic function, we are some of the strongest survivors out there. I mean, we can eat almost anything and burn it for fuel. I mean, the human body is pretty amazing at that. It's pretty adaptable as far as fuel sources go. It's literally like having an engine in your car that you can run diesel, ethanol, gasoline, kerosene, whatever fuel source you want, and you can mix them all in the same tank and it'll just burn it in the ratios that you mix them in. Without any other calibration needed. It will just calibrate itself on the fly as soon as you change the fuel tank and the mixture in there, and it will just burn it at the right ratios. It's like having a car engine that's capable of doing that. The human body is that adaptable as far as fuel sources go. It will burn just about any source of energy that you feed it within reason. It will even burn things that are poisons, such as alcohol, ethanol, ethene. Is a poison. It is absolutely poisonous. But our bodies are so adaptable metabolically that we can still extract the energy and use it for fuel. Obviously, if you drink too much of it, you get liver damage, but if you drink too much of it, it can kill you right there from alcohol poisoning, and it does happen, and it is poisonous, but we can take that poison and burn it for fuel. We actually use the calories in it as a fuel source and can do so pretty successfully. So it's really pretty amazing when you think about it, and that's really the way that you have to look at it. Whatever fuel you're putting into your body, that is what it's going to burn, and it's really amazing when you think about it. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.